As the luxurious ballroom glistened under the soft golden lights, the rich aroma of freshly poured champagne filled the air. Guests in their finest attire whispered among themselves, glasses in hand, as they admired the grand setting. Music played softly in the background, adding an air of sophistication. The moment was perfect, but something, or rather someone, was about to change everything. A small figure stood at the back of the room, her eyes wide, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. Her name was Maya, and she was barely visible in the sea of elegantly dressed adults. At the center of the room, standing near the grand chandelier, was the billionaire, Elliot Granger, dressed in a sharp tuxedo. His smile was calm, but his eyes held a hint of calculation as he surveyed the room with an air of authority. He had built his empire through sheer brilliance and power, but tonight, it was not his business acumen that would determine the course of the evening. Maya had one goal: to stop him from making a mistake, and she was willing to do whatever it took. The room fell silent when Maya, standing alone, spoke up in a voice that shattered the calm like a siren's wail. "Stop! Don't touch it! It's poisoned!" Her words echoed through the room, and for a moment, everything froze. Elliot's hand, which had been reaching for the glass of wine at the center of the table, halted in mid-air. His face remained expressionless, but the entire atmosphere shifted. The guests turned their heads, murmurs filled the space, and the tension was palpable. Elliot's eyes narrowed as he turned to Maya, confused. "Maya, what are you talking about?" he asked, his voice calm but with an edge of disbelief. Maya didn't flinch. She had to be sure. "Please, don't drink it. I saw her put something in it. You don't know what she's capable of." The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation, but no one spoke. The silence was deafening. Elliot's eyes darted from Maya to the woman standing beside him, his fiancée, Isadora. Her face remained perfectly composed, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. For a moment, Maya could see the slightest flicker of discomfort, hidden beneath a perfect mask, but no one else seemed to notice. Maya stepped forward, her tiny figure seemingly out of place in the sea of wealthy and powerful adults. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone and pressed play on the video she had recorded. The footage was shaky, but it was clear. Isadora had been in the kitchen earlier, secretly slipping something into the wine glass. "Watch this," Maya said, her voice unwavering, though her heart pounded in her chest. The video played, and the guests around them leaned in. Elliot's jaw clenched as the evidence unfolded before his eyes. He turned to Isadora, his face pale, his earlier confidence slipping away. Isadora laughed nervously, but it didn't reach her eyes. "This is absurd," she said, her voice too smooth. "This is just a child's imagination. She's probably just confused." But Elliot wasn't listening anymore. He reached for the glass, his fingers trembling as he picked it up with the gloves Maya had handed him. The moment stretched on forever. With a deep breath, he dabbed the cloth against his face, the truth crashing down on him like a tidal wave. Maya had been right. Isadora's smile faltered, and the room fell into an eerie silence. This was just the beginning. The room was filled with a heavy silence as the video continued to play, the truth now laid bare for everyone to see. Elliot Granger stood frozen, the wineglass still in his hand. His gaze, once sharp and confident, now trembled with doubt. He looked at Isadora, the woman who had once held his trust, and yet now, all he saw was a mask, a lie he had believed for far too long. Isadora's expression had shifted, the confidence she wore so easily now replaced by a subtle unease. The guests around them exchanged glances, unsure of what to make of the scene unfolding before them. For a moment, no one knew what to say. But then, as the room held its breath, Maya's voice broke the stillness. "I told you," she whispered, her words calm but carrying the weight of a revelation no one had wanted to face. She was just a child, but in that moment, she had done something none of the adults around her had been able to do. She had exposed the truth. Elliot slowly lowered the glass, his fingers still trembling. He couldn't look away from the video, couldn't deny what was so clearly shown. His fiancée, the woman he had planned to spend the rest of his life with, had been plotting against him. His mind raced, the reality of it all sinking in like a cold wave. How had he not seen it? How had he allowed himself to be blind to the signs? "Maya," he said, his voice shaking, "where did you get this?" Maya didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her small frame radiating a quiet strength. I saw her. I saw what she was doing. I didn't know what to do, so I made sure you would see the truth, she replied, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. The room was still. All eyes were on Elliot, waiting for his next move. He could feel the weight of their stares, their judgment hanging over him like a dark cloud. His reputation, his image, everything he had built, was it all a lie? He turned to Isadora, his face hardening with each passing second. "Is this true?" he demanded. Isadora, now cornered, tried to maintain her composure. "Elliot, this is ridiculous," she said, her voice smooth but laced with thinly veiled panic. "This is just a misunderstanding, a child's imagination, nothing more." But Maya wasn't backing down. She had seen the truth, and now, she wasn't afraid to speak it. "You put something in his drink. You thought no one would notice, but I saw it. I heard you." The room was electric with tension. The guests, who had once been swept up in the elegance of the evening, now watched with bated breath as the scene unraveled before them. Maya's accusation hung in the air, undeniable. Isadora took a step back, her eyes flickering nervously. She could see the doubt in Elliot's eyes, and for the first time, she knew she had lost control of the situation. The truth was out, and there was no way to take it back. "I didn't mean to hurt him," Isadora said, her voice cracking. "I just wanted to make sure I'd be taken care of. I thought I could make him love me." Her words, desperate and broken, did nothing to soften the blow. Elliot's gaze hardened. He had been deceived by the one person he had trusted the most, the woman he had planned to marry, the woman he had believed was his future. But now, he saw her for who she truly was, a fraud. He took a deep breath, the anger and betrayal boiling inside him. "Leave," he said coldly, his voice firm. "Get out of my sight. I don't want to see you again." Isadora's face fell, the reality of the situation finally dawning on her. She had lost everything: her future, her chance at wealth and security, and the man she had manipulated. But it didn't matter anymore. The truth had come out. The game was over. She turned and left, her footsteps echoing in the quiet room. The guests began to murmur among themselves, but Maya remained still, her eyes focused on Elliot. She hadn't moved an inch since she had revealed the truth. Elliot, still in shock, finally turned to her. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft but sincere. Maya didn't smile. She just nodded, her small eyes filled with a wisdom far beyond her years. She had done what no one else could. She had saved him. And in that moment, she had reminded him of something he had long forgotten. The truth would always come to light, no matter how hard someone tried to hide it. As the room continued to buzz with the aftermath of the shocking revelation, Elliot stood motionless, his mind racing. The truth was now undeniable, but the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on him. Maya had exposed Isadora's betrayal, and he was left with the bitter sting of betrayal, not just from the woman he had trusted, but from himself for not seeing it sooner. His thoughts were interrupted when Maya, still standing firmly in the center of the room, spoke again, this time more quietly but with a sense of urgency. "There's more," she said, her voice steady, yet tinged with concern. Elliot turned toward her, confusion still clouding his face. "What do you mean, there's more?" Maya's eyes flickered with a mixture of determination and fear. She had already revealed one truth, but something in her instincts told her that the danger wasn't over. "I think she's not working alone," Maya said. Her words hung in the air, heavier than anything she had said before. "I saw someone else, someone you trust." Elliot's breath caught in his throat. A feeling of dread settled in his stomach. The moment Maya spoke, the room seemed to freeze again, as if everyone was holding their breath. He thought of the people in his life, his closest confidants, his business associates. Could someone else have been involved in this plot? Was there more to this than just a jealous fiancé? "Who?" Elliot demanded, his voice sharp, his body tense. Maya glanced around, making sure no one else was listening, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I saw Frank. He was with her, in the hallway, just before dinner. I don't know what they were talking about, but I saw him slip something into your drink, too, not just her." The world seemed to tilt for a moment. Frank. His longtime associate, his trusted business partner, the man who had been with him through thick and thin, the man he had relied on more than anyone else. His heart sank as the weight of Maya's words sank in. Could he have been part of this? Was Frank involved in this scheme to poison him, to take everything from him? Elliot felt the ground beneath him shake as everything he thought he knew about his life, his business, and the people closest to him crumbled. No, he muttered under his breath, not wanting to believe it. No, it can't be. But Maya's eyes were unwavering, and the more she spoke, the more it became clear that she wasn't just imagining things. She had seen something. She had felt the truth. He was there, Elliot. He's working with her. They wanted to get rid of you. Elliot's mind raced. Was this part of some larger plan to undermine him? Was Frank's betrayal the final piece in the puzzle that had been slowly falling apart? He couldn't ignore the possibility. He had to know the truth. We need to find him, Elliot said, his voice filled with urgency. Now. He turned quickly, his heart pounding. As he started to move toward the door, he looked back at Maya, the young girl who had saved him, who had opened his eyes to the reality he had been blind to for so long. She stood there, her expression calm, but in her eyes, he saw the weight of everything she had already seen, the betrayals, the lies, the danger that still lurked in the shadows. She wasn't just a child anymore. She was his ally, his protector. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Maya nodded, her gaze never wavering. She had done more than just save his life. She had saved his soul. With no time to lose, they moved quickly through the grand hall, past the stunned guests who still whispered about the drama unfolding around them. Elliot's mind was sharp now, filled with only one goal: to find Frank and confront him, to expose the entire truth. As they reached the door, Elliot glanced back at the room one last time. The life he had known, the life he had built, was slipping away, but for the first time, he felt a sense of clarity. He wasn't alone anymore. Maya had shown him the way. With each step he took, he felt the weight of the betrayal lift, replaced by a new sense of purpose. The truth was out there, and he was going to find it. The tension in the air was palpable as Elliot and Maya rushed through the grand hallway, the footsteps of their shoes echoing in the empty corridor. Elliot's mind was consumed by one thought: finding Frank, confronting him, and getting to the bottom of the betrayal that had shaken his entire life. He had trusted Frank for years, and now, the possibility that Frank had been part of this plot to deceive him, to poison him, was a bitter pill he struggled to swallow. He didn't know what he would find, but he knew he couldn't back down now. Maya walked beside him, her eyes sharp and alert, as if she could sense the weight of the moment. She had seen so much more than a child should have to, but in her, Elliot saw a quiet strength that gave him some comfort. She had been the one to expose the truth, the one who had saved him from the dangerous web of lies that had been spun around him. They reached the door to Frank's office, and Elliot hesitated. His hand hovered over the doorknob as a flood of emotions washed over him. Was he ready for this? Was he prepared to face the man who had been his friend, his confidant, for so long? He took a deep breath, steadied himself, and turned the knob. The door creaked open, and the sight before him was almost surreal. Frank sat behind his desk, as calm and collected as ever. But there was a coldness to him now, a distance that made Elliot's blood run cold. The man he had once trusted so completely now seemed like a stranger. Frank looked up as the door opened, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips. "Elliot, I wasn't expecting you," he said, his voice smooth, as if nothing had changed. But to Elliot, everything had changed. "We need to talk," Elliot said, his voice low, steady but filled with barely contained anger. Frank's smirk faltered for just a moment, but it quickly returned as he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "About what?" Frank asked, casually. "About what you've been doing behind my back," Elliot replied, his eyes narrowing. Maya stood a few steps behind Elliot, her eyes fixed on Frank, her expression unreadable. "I know what you've been involved in, Frank," Elliot continued, his voice growing colder with each word. "I know about the poisoning, and I know you've been working with Isadora. You were in on it, weren't you?" Frank's eyes flickered, but he quickly masked the brief moment of panic. He stood up from his chair, the calm demeanor fading for just a second. "You have no idea what you're talking about," Frank said, his voice suddenly sharper. I think you're just jumping to conclusions. Am I? Elliot pressed, stepping closer to the desk. Maya saw you. She saw you with Isadora, just before dinner. She saw you slip something into my drink. I have the proof. Frank's face twisted in a mixture of shock and disbelief, but his eyes never left Elliot's. Maya? He scoffed. You're going to listen to a little girl now? She's not just a little girl. Elliot shot back, his voice rising. She's the one who saved my life. She's the one who uncovered your lies. Frank's facade started to crack, just slightly. He paced around the room, his hands running through his hair as if trying to gather his thoughts. You don't understand, Elliot. You've been blind. This isn't just about you. It's about everything we've worked for, everything we've built. You think you can trust anyone in this game? Elliot felt his anger surge again, but it was different this time. It wasn't just anger at Frank. It was anger at himself for not seeing the truth sooner. I trusted you, Elliot said, his voice tight with emotion. I trusted you more than anyone, and you've been using that trust to take everything from me. Frank stopped pacing and looked directly at Elliot. For the first time, there was no mask, no smirk, just cold, hard truth. I didn't want it to go this far, but you left me no choice, Frank said, his voice low and almost regretful. You were too focused on your empire, on your power. You didn't see how the world was changing. I did what I had to do. You think this is what you had to do? Elliot's voice cracked, a mix of disbelief and heartbreak flooding his words. You think poisoning me, betraying me, was the answer? Frank's eyes hardened. It was the only way to survive. And you, Elliot, you were too blind to see it. The words hung in the air like a weight, each one cutting deeper than the last. Elliot's heart raced, but this time it wasn't from fear or confusion. It was from the burning need for justice, for the truth to come to light. He wasn't going to let Frank get away with this. Not now. Not ever. You're done, Frank, Elliot said, his voice steady. This ends now. Maya stood beside him, a quiet strength emanating from her. She had played her part. Now it was time for Elliot to finish what she had started. Frank's face contorted with rage, but he said nothing more. The truth had been exposed, and there was no going back. This was the moment when everything changed, when the final piece of the puzzle fell into place, and it was over. The quiet tension in the air was deafening as Elliot stood by the door, his hand resting on the handle, but his thoughts were far away. The confrontation with Frank had shaken him to his core, but there was still much left to do. His mind raced with the details of the betrayal, Frank's words, the hidden truth, the moment when everything began to unravel. But despite the anger, despite the betrayal, he knew that the next step had to be taken carefully. Maya, standing next to him, seemed unbothered by the storm of emotions swirling around them. She had already done more than most adults could fathom. She had uncovered the truth, exposed the danger, and saved his life. Now, she was a quiet force beside him. We can't let this go any longer, Elliot said, his voice firm, though his heart still ached with the weight of what had happened. The lies are too deep, and I won't let Frank get away with it. It's time to make sure he's held accountable for what he's done. Maya nodded silently, her eyes fixed ahead, unwavering. She didn't need words to understand what needed to happen next. As they made their way to the front of the mansion, the sound of their footsteps echoed in the grand hallway. The guests had long since left, their whispers lingering in the air. The evening had taken an unexpected turn, and the aftermath would have repercussions far beyond just the betrayal of a fiancé or a trusted business partner. This was about power, deception, and truth. The walk to the office was long, but it felt like the journey had only just begun. Elliot could feel the eyes of the mansion on him, the weight of his decisions pressing down on his shoulders. He had built this empire, brick by brick, but now it was time to tear down the lies that threatened to destroy everything. Frank had made a critical mistake. He had underestimated Elliot, and more importantly, he had underestimated the power of truth. As they reached Frank's office, Elliot turned to Maya, her small figure standing tall beside him. "Stay behind me," he instructed. Maya didn't hesitate. She stepped back slightly, her eyes alert, watching every move. Elliot could feel his pulse quicken as he prepared to confront Frank again. He could already hear Frank's voice, his excuses, his lies. But this time, there would be no escape. This time, Elliot was ready. He swung open the door to Frank's office and stepped inside. The room was empty, cold, and still. But the air felt charged, as if it were waiting for the storm that was about to come. Elliot's eyes scanned the room, his anger simmering beneath the surface. "Frank," he called, his voice echoing in the quiet room. There was no response. Elliot's heart began to race as he realized that Frank was nowhere to be found. The office was immaculate, just as it always had been, but something felt off. The papers on Frank's desk were untouched, and the lights flickered faintly in the dim room. Elliot's mind raced. Where was he? What was happening? "He's gone," Maya said quietly from behind him. Elliot turned, his expression hardening. "Gone?" he repeated, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "What do you mean, gone?" "He left," Maya said, her voice soft but filled with a quiet certainty. "I saw him earlier, but now, he's not here." Elliot's stomach churned. Frank had been part of his life for too long, too many years of trust, only for it to all be shattered in an instant. But now, it seemed like Frank was running from the consequences of his actions. "He's not getting away with this," Elliot muttered under his breath, his resolve hardening. "We'll find him, and when we do, we'll make sure he answers for everything." The two of them turned and left the office, Elliot's mind already working through his options. Frank had slipped away, but Elliot wasn't going to let him disappear. He would find him, and when he did, the truth would come to light. It didn't matter how long it took. The truth always found its way to the surface. As they moved through the mansion, a sense of determination settled over Elliot. Maya had already helped him see the truth, but now it was time to ensure that everyone else saw it too. No more lies, no more deception. He was done being blind to the truth. He would confront Frank, and he would confront the darkness that had been hiding in plain sight. And when he did, nothing would ever be the same again. The night was heavy with tension as Elliot and Maya sat in the quiet of the car, the engine humming softly beneath them as they sped down the darkened streets. The city, usually bustling with life, felt eerily still as they drove through the winding roads. Elliot's mind was far from calm. Frank was on the run, and the thought that someone so close to him could betray him so deeply weighed heavily on his shoulders. But it wasn't just about Frank anymore. It was about everything that had been hidden, everything that had been carefully concealed under layers of lies and deceit. It was about the empire he had built, the trust he had placed in people only for it all to be shattered. Maya sat beside him, her eyes focused on the road ahead, her small hands folded in her lap. Despite the gravity of the situation, she seemed unaffected, almost calm. Elliot knew she had already done more than he could have ever expected. She had uncovered the truth. She had seen what he couldn't, and now, she was with him, standing by his side. "Do you think he's gone for good?" Maya's voice broke the silence, soft but piercing. Elliot turned his head slightly, his eyes flickering to her. "Frank?" he asked, as though he hadn't been able to shake the thought of him for a second. Maya nodded, her gaze never leaving the road. "He won't just disappear," Elliot said, his voice firm, though the doubt gnawed at him. "He knows I won't let him go that easily. But it's not just about him. It's about everything. We can't let this go." Maya's quiet confidence settled over him. "You're right," she said, "but you need to find him first. We need to get ahead of him, so he doesn't destroy everything you've worked for." The words hit Elliot harder than he expected. It wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't just about punishing Frank for what he had done. It was about protecting everything he had built: the business, the people who depended on him, and his own sense of identity. If Frank got away, if he disappeared without facing the consequences, everything Elliot had worked for would be for nothing. The stakes had never been higher. "I won't let him take everything from me," Elliot muttered under his breath, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. The streets passed in a blur, the dim streetlights casting fleeting shadows across his face. Maya turned to look at him, her expression unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, something that made Elliot feel like, despite everything, they could still win. "We'll find him," she said, her voice steady, resolute. "But we have to think ahead. If Frank is planning something else, we need to know what it is." Elliot nodded. She was right. Frank had been meticulous, calculating. He wasn't going to let something as simple as a confrontation stop him. "Let's check the records," Elliot said. his mind already turning with possibilities. We can start with the company's financials. Frank always had access to the sensitive files. If he's planning to steal something, that's where he'll start. Maya glanced at him, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard lights. "You think he's trying to sabotage everything?" she asked. "He's done it before," Elliot replied, the edge in his voice sharper now. "He's always had a hand in the shadows. If he thinks he can take control, he'll go after the company's assets. It's his last move." The idea sent a chill down his spine. If Frank had planned something as drastic as that, Elliot knew it was a race against time. They had to move quickly. Elliot pulled into the parking lot of the company's headquarters, his headlights illuminating the sleek, modern building. The place that had once felt like home now seemed like a battleground, a place where trust had been broken and everything was at stake. He turned off the engine and got out of the car, Maya right behind him. The door to the building creaked as they entered, the air inside cool and sterile, the usual hum of activity now replaced by an eerie silence. The office was empty, the lights dimmed for the night. Elliot's heart raced as he moved swiftly through the hallways, his footsteps echoing off the marble floors. He reached the office he shared with Frank, the door slightly ajar. Inside, the room was dark, the computer screens off, and the desk cluttered with papers, just as it always had been. But something was different. The filing cabinets had been opened, and some of the files were missing. Elliot's stomach dropped. Frank had already made his move. He wasn't just hiding. He was taking everything, piece by piece, leaving nothing behind. Maya stepped forward, her eyes scanning the room. "He's already taken what he needed," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elliot clenched his fists, the realization hitting him harder than he expected. Frank was playing the long game, and now, Elliot had no choice but to do the same. They had to stay one step ahead. He turned toward Maya, his expression grim but determined. "We're not done yet," he said, his voice low and filled with resolve. "We will find him, and when we do, it will all be over." The streets were quiet as Elliot and Maya made their way to the car, the heavy weight of their mission settling over them. It had been hours since they discovered Frank's betrayal, and now, they were more determined than ever to get the truth. Frank had been clever, always one step ahead, but this time, they were ready. Elliot couldn't help but feel a mixture of dread and adrenaline. He had trusted Frank for years, but now, the truth was clear. Frank was more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. He had tried to take everything from Elliot, his empire, his reputation, his life, and he wouldn't stop until he had it all. Maya sat beside him in the passenger seat, her gaze focused ahead, a quiet intensity in her eyes. She had been a constant in the chaos, her calmness, a steady anchor. Elliot turned to her, his voice low but resolute. "We need to find Frank before he can do any more damage," he said, his fingers gripping the steering wheel tightly. Maya nodded, her eyes narrowing with determination. "We will, but we need to be smart. He's already one step ahead. We can't let him get away with it." Elliot's mind raced with possibilities. Frank had always been a master manipulator, and now, he was running, hiding in the shadows, knowing that the truth was closing in on him. He had made sure to cover his tracks, erasing evidence, lying to everyone, and playing the part of the victim. But now, Elliot had a different plan. They weren't just going to find Frank. They were going to expose him for what he truly was. The car screeched to a halt in front of a nondescript building on the outskirts of town. Elliot knew this place well. It was one of Frank's secret locations, a place he had used in the past for his own shady dealings. They had tracked Frank here, using every lead they could find. This was the moment they had been waiting for. They were going to confront him, once and for all. Elliot turned off the engine, the sound of the car's hum fading into the tense silence that enveloped them. He looked at Maya, his expression hardening. "Stay close," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside him. "We do this together." Maya gave a small nod, her hand reaching for the door handle. The weight of their decision hung in the air as they stepped out of the car, the cold night air biting at their skin. They moved quickly, silently, each step bringing them closer to Frank. The building loomed in front of them, dark and empty, but Elliot knew that inside, Frank was waiting for them to make a mistake, waiting for them to falter. But they weren't going to make that mistake. They weren't going to give him the chance. The door to the building creaked as they entered, the dim light flickering overhead. The room was eerily quiet, save for the faint sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. Elliot's heart raced, his every sense on high alert. He could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation of what was to come. They had to act fast. Frank had to be somewhere inside, hiding in the shadows, waiting to make his move. "Frank," Elliot called out, his voice echoing through the empty space. No response. The silence stretched on, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire world had come to a standstill. But then, a voice from the darkness broke the silence. "You're too late, Elliot." Frank's voice came, low and taunting, from somewhere in the shadows. "You think you can stop me now? You've always been too soft." Elliot's jaw clenched. There he was, the man who had betrayed him, the man who had played him for a fool. "I'm done letting you control everything," Elliot said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "You're finished, Frank." Frank laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Finished?" he repeated. "You think you can stop me? You think you have the power to take me down?" Elliot's eyes narrowed. He wasn't just going to confront Frank. He was going to make sure Frank understood that he had underestimated him, that the game was over. "You don't know who you're dealing with," Elliot said, taking a step forward. "This ends tonight. You're not going to take anything from me anymore." There was a flicker of movement in the shadows, and suddenly, Frank stepped into view, his face twisted into a smirk. "You really think you can stop me? You think you have the power to take me down? I've been one step ahead of you this entire time." But Elliot wasn't listening anymore. He had heard enough. He wasn't going to play Frank's game any longer. This wasn't about power or control, it was about taking back what was his. "It's over, Frank," Elliot said, his voice unwavering. "You're not in control anymore." For the first time, Frank's smirk faltered, the confidence he had always worn so easily slipping away. He took a step back, eyes darting around the room, looking for an escape. But it was too late. Maya stepped forward, her eyes locked on Frank, her voice calm but filled with the strength she had shown from the beginning. "You're not getting away," she said, her words carrying the weight of everything that had happened. "This time, you'll face the consequences." Frank looked at her, his face contorting in disbelief. He couldn't believe it. The little girl he had never taken seriously had just become the final nail in his coffin. He had underestimated her, just as he had underestimated Elliot, and now, it was too late. Frank's face twisted in frustration as he backed away further into the shadows, his smirk evaporating into thin air. His confidence was gone, replaced by a palpable sense of fear. For the first time in years, Frank realized he was out of moves. The control he had once wielded with ease, manipulating everyone around him, was slipping from his grasp. He had never expected a confrontation like this, and now, as the weight of his own lies caught up with him, he knew there was no escape. "You don't get to do this, Elliot," Frank hissed, his voice now tinged with desperation. "You don't understand what you're really up against." Elliot's eyes narrowed, his posture firm and unyielding as he took another step toward Frank. "What I understand is that you're done," he said, his voice cold. "You've manipulated everyone, Frank. You've used people for your own gain, and you thought you could get away with it. But you were wrong." Maya stood quietly beside Elliot, her eyes never leaving Frank. Despite her young age, there was a quiet strength in her, a confidence that came from knowing the truth and the power it held. Frank's eyes flicked to her for a split second, the realization dawning on him that this was not just a game of power between two men anymore. He had underestimated her all along, but now, she was his reckoning. "What's it going to be, Frank?" Elliot's voice was hard as stone now. "Are you going to come clean, or are we going to have to make you?" Frank's hand clenched into a fist, his knuckles turning white. For a moment, it seemed like he might snap, make a run for it, but instead, he just stood there, as if weighing his options. "You think I'm going to confess to you?" he sneered. "You really think you've won?" The tension in the room grew thicker, and Elliot could almost feel the years of deception and manipulation weighing on Frank's shoulders, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter how much Frank tried to deflect or deny the truth. It was all out now. There was nowhere for him to hide. "I don't need you to confess to me," Elliot replied, his voice unwavering. "I've seen enough. I have all the proof I need. You're finished, Frank." Frank's expression shifted from anger to fear, and for the first time, Elliot saw the man in front of him for what he truly was. A coward, hiding behind lies, willing to destroy anything and anyone for his own selfish gain. "You don't know what it's like," Frank muttered under his breath. "You've never had to fight for what you have. Everything you've built, it's all fake. You think people like you like us don't have to make hard choices? You think I didn't do what I had to in order to survive?" His words were sharp, filled with bitterness and resentment. Elliot stood still, his face hardening. "I've fought for everything I have," he said, "but I didn't do it by stepping on people. I didn't do it by betraying the people who trusted me. That's where you and I are different." Frank's eyes flickered with a flash of anger before he laughed bitterly, as if the idea of redemption or change was laughable to him. "You think you're better than me?" he spat, his voice rising in pitch. "You think you're some kind of hero?" "No," Elliot said, his voice steady. "I don't think I'm a hero, but I think I'm done letting people like you ruin everything." Frank's shoulders slumped as the fight seemed to leave him. He had no more words, no more defenses. For all his bluster, for all the games he had played, the truth had finally caught up with him. He was cornered, and there was no way out. Maya stepped forward, her gaze piercing as she looked at Frank with a quiet intensity. "You don't get to destroy people's lives," she said softly, but there was a power in her voice that made Frank flinch. "You don't get to hurt people because you're too afraid to face your own truth." Frank didn't respond. He just stood there, defeated. The weight of his actions was finally sinking in, and he knew there was no escaping the consequences. Elliot turned to Maya, giving her a small nod of acknowledgement. She had been the one to start this, to uncover the lies that had been buried for so long. Without her, none of this would have been possible. As the silence stretched on, Elliot turned back to Frank. "It's over," he said. "You'll answer for what you've done, and you'll face the consequences of your actions. I won't let you destroy anyone else." Frank didn't fight back. He didn't try to run. He just stood there, staring at the ground, his face a mixture of resignation and defeat, and in that moment, Elliot knew he had won. The truth had come out, and no matter how hard Frank tried to fight it, there was nothing he could do to stop it now. The room, once filled with tension and fear, now felt heavy with a different kind of stillness. It was the stillness of justice, of the truth finally prevailing over the lies. And as they left the building, the weight that had been on Elliot's shoulders began to lift. He wasn't free yet, but he was closer than he had ever been. He had faced the darkest part of his life, and with Maya by his side, he knew that nothing could stop him from reclaiming everything he had lost. The air was thick with anticipation as Elliot and Maya walked out of the building, the weight of everything that had just transpired hanging heavily on their shoulders. Frank was finally exposed, his years of manipulation and deceit laid bare for everyone to see. The confrontation had been intense, but it wasn't over yet. There were still questions to answer, and Elliot knew that this moment was only the beginning of a much longer journey. As they approached the car, Maya spoke first, her voice steady but filled with a quiet understanding. "What now?" she asked, her eyes fixed ahead. Elliot paused for a moment, taking in the cool night air. He had faced so much, and yet there was a part of him that felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, he felt like the truth had finally won, but he knew there was still much to do. "Now we make sure Frank can't do any more damage," he said, his voice firm. "We need to protect the company, protect the people who've been affected by this. Frank won't stop. He'll try to come for us again, but this time, we'll be ready." Maya nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You've already done so much. What happens to Frank now?" Elliot's jaw clenched as he slid into the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. "We'll make sure he faces the consequences," he said quietly. "But right now, we need to secure everything. We need to take back control." He started the car, and they drove in silence for a few minutes, the city lights flashing by in a blur. Elliot's mind was racing, his thoughts spinning around everything that had happened. He had trusted Frank, relied on him for so long, but Frank's betrayal had shaken him to his core. The question that haunted him now was how far Frank was willing to go to destroy everything Elliot had worked for. He had already stolen company files, hidden evidence, and manipulated everyone around him, but Elliot wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not this time. We'll need to talk to the board, Elliot said suddenly, breaking the silence. They need to know everything that's happened. We can't let Frank manipulate them too. Maya looked at him, her eyes sharp. And the others? The people who've been working with Frank? Elliot sighed, the weight of the situation still heavy. We'll have to figure out who's been involved. We need to make sure no one else has been playing us. They drove in silence again, the tension thick in the air. Elliot's thoughts kept circling back to the same point, protecting everything he had built. He had fought hard for his empire. But now, it was more than just business. It was about integrity. It was about proving that truth always prevails, no matter how hard people like Frank tried to bury it. As they pulled into the parking garage, Elliot's mind shifted to the next step. The board meeting was crucial. They needed to act quickly. He could already feel the pressure mounting. This was it, the moment to take back control. The elevator ride up to the boardroom was silent, the weight of the coming confrontation pressing down on Elliot's chest. Maya stood beside him, her calm presence a silent reassurance. She had been his anchor throughout this whole ordeal, and he wasn't going to let her down. The doors opened, and they stepped into the boardroom, where the members of the board were already gathered, their faces tense with curiosity. The moment they saw Elliot, the room fell silent. He could feel their eyes on him, their questions unspoken but heavy in the air. "We need to talk," Elliot said, his voice steady, commanding attention. "There's something you need to know about Frank." He stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the faces in the room. "Frank has been deceiving all of you. He's been manipulating the company, using his position to line his own pockets and sabotage everything we've worked for. He's been plotting against me, against all of us." A murmur rippled through the room as the board members exchanged shocked looks. But Elliot didn't wait for them to digest the information. "I've already gathered the proof. Frank's actions are no longer a secret. He's trying to destroy this company, and I won't let him." The tension in the room was thick, but Elliot's voice was unwavering. "We need to move quickly. We can't let him take any more. We need to take back control and make sure he's held accountable." Maya stepped forward, her eyes sharp and unwavering. "We've already confronted him. He's gone into hiding, but we won't stop until he faces the consequences of his actions." The room was still, and for a moment, there was only silence. But then, one of the board members, a woman who had worked closely with Frank, spoke up. "How do we know we can trust you, Elliot?" she asked, her voice laced with skepticism. "After everything that's happened, how do we know you're not just as much a part of this as Frank was?" Elliot's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't let the question rattle him. "You can trust the truth," he said, his voice unwavering, "and the truth is that I'm fighting for this company, for all of you. We've all been played, but it ends here. Now, we have a choice. We can stand together, take back control, and ensure that this company stays on the right path, or we can let Frank win. I'm not going to let that happen." The room was still for a moment longer, but then, one by one, the board members began to nod, their faces slowly shifting from suspicion to determination. "We're with you, Elliot," one of the members said, his voice strong. "Let's take him down." And just like that, Elliot knew they were in this together. Frank had underestimated him, and now, he would face the consequences. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, Elliot felt like he had allies on his side. And this time, the truth would win. The room was heavy with the weight of the truth as Elliot stood at the front, the board members seated around the long conference table. The harsh fluorescent lights overhead flickered, casting an unsteady glow on the polished wood. Maya, standing beside him, seemed unfazed by the tension in the air, her gaze calm yet sharp. The storm had passed, but the aftermath remained. Frank's betrayal had been exposed, and now, it was time to pick up the pieces. Elliot cleared his throat, his voice steady. "We've dealt with the truth, but now we face the consequences." The board members exchanged uneasy glances, their eyes flickering between Elliot and each other. One of them, a woman in a tailored suit, spoke up. "We need to figure out how to handle this, Elliot. Frank's actions have affected more than just you. The entire company could be at risk." Elliot nodded, his jaw tightening. He had known this moment would come. The exposure of Frank's deceit would not only cost him personally but could also ripple through the company, affecting everyone. "I understand," he said, his voice unwavering. "But this isn't just about Frank. It's about the integrity of this company. We need to make sure that nothing like this happens again." He paused, his eyes scanning the room. "I want to ensure that every corner of this organization is safe from manipulation. We need to root out any other potential threats, no matter how deep they are." Maya shifted beside him, her expression thoughtful. "It's not just about protecting the company," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension. "It's about rebuilding trust. You've lost the trust of your employees, your partners. You can't move forward without restoring that." Elliot turned to look at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. She was right. Frank had shattered more than just his reputation. He had shaken the foundation of everything Elliot had worked for. "I'll do whatever it takes," he replied, his resolve firming. "We'll rebuild. We'll regain trust, piece by piece." A man in a dark suit, one of the senior members of the board, spoke up. "What about Frank?" he asked. "He's still out there, and he could cause more harm if we don't act quickly." Elliot's mind raced, the memories of Frank's calculated manipulation still fresh in his mind. "We'll find him," he said, "and when we do, he'll answer for everything. But right now, we need to focus on the next steps. We can't afford to let this linger." The board members nodded, their faces grim but determined. They understood the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about salvaging what was left, about ensuring that the company remained strong in the face of adversity. Maya's eyes softened as she glanced at Elliot. "You don't have to do this alone," she said, her voice low but sincere. "You've got people who believe in you, people who will fight with you." Elliot's chest tightened, the weight of everything pressing down on him. "I know," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And I won't let them down. I won't let Frank's betrayal be the end of this company." He turned back to the board, his eyes unwavering. "We start fresh. We move forward. Together." The room was still for a moment, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning. But then, one by one, the board members stood, their expressions resolute. They were in this together, ready to rebuild, ready to face the challenges ahead. As they filed out of the room, Elliot felt a sense of resolve settle over him. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be more obstacles, more moments of doubt. But he knew that with Maya by his side, with the support of those who believed in him, he would find a way through. The truth had been revealed, and though the battle wasn't over, the first steps toward healing had been taken. As Elliot left the boardroom, his mind was already working through the next steps. Frank was out there, somewhere, but he wasn't worried about him right now. His focus was on the company, on restoring what had been broken. He would fight for it, for every person who depended on him, and he would make sure that no one, not even Frank, could take it from him again. The sun had just begun to set, casting a warm golden glow over the city as Elliot sat in his office, staring out at the skyline. The weight of the past few weeks hung heavy on his shoulders, but as he looked out at the horizon, something inside him shifted. The battle against Frank was over. The lies had been exposed, the truth had come to light, and now it was time to rebuild. His mind drifted back to the moment when Maya had stood beside him, her small figure unwavering as she helped expose Frank's treachery. She had been the catalyst for everything, the one who had seen through the lies when no one else had. Without her, none of this would have been possible. Elliot's heart swelled with gratitude for the courage she had shown. She wasn't just a child, she was a force of nature, a reminder that even in the face of the greatest adversity, the truth would always rise. As the room grew darker, Elliot turned from the window, his thoughts racing. He had a company to rebuild, relationships to restore, and trust to regain. But despite the daunting road ahead, he felt a sense of hope, a renewed sense of purpose. Maya had reminded him that no matter how much someone tried to tear you down, there was always a way to rise above. The phone on his desk buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. He picked it up, his eyes narrowing as he read the message on the screen. It was from one of the board members. "Elliot, we need to talk. There's something important." His heart skipped a beat. After everything that had happened, after all the damage Frank had caused, the idea that there was something else he hadn't seen yet made his pulse quicken. He didn't hesitate. He dialed the number, waiting as the phone rang. When the voice on the other end answered, Elliot didn't waste any time. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern. "Elliot, We've been looking into everything, every detail, every transaction, and there's something you need to know. Frank wasn't working alone. There's a larger network involved. People we trusted, people who have been helping him. Elliot's mind raced as the words sank in. The idea that there were still people in his company who were working against him, people he had trusted, was a blow he hadn't expected. "Who?" he asked, his voice tight with frustration. "Who's involved? We don't have all the names yet, but we're working on it," the board member replied. "We just wanted to make sure you knew. This isn't over, Elliot." The weight of the news settled over him, but he refused to let it crush him. He had already faced the worst of it. Frank had come for everything, but Elliot had fought back, and now, he was more determined than ever to protect what was his. "Thank you for the heads up," Elliot said, his voice steady. "I'll take it from here." He hung up the phone, his mind already working through the next steps. There were still people in his company who needed to be dealt with. The corruption wasn't over, and neither was the fight. He had learned a valuable lesson in the past few weeks. No matter how successful you were, no matter how much power you had, you couldn't trust everyone. But that didn't mean he had to fight alone. Maya had shown him that. And now, it was his turn to be the protector. His thoughts shifted back to her, the little girl who had risked everything to save him, to expose the truth. She was a reminder that courage wasn't about age or power. It was about doing what was right, even when it was the hardest thing to do. Elliot stood from his desk, his eyes hard with determination. The road ahead would be long, and there would be more challenges to face. But he was ready. He wasn't going to let anyone take what was rightfully his, and he wasn't going to let anyone hurt the people who mattered most. He walked toward the door, pausing for a moment as he glanced back at the empty office. This was just the beginning. He had a company to rebuild, a future to secure, and a promise to keep. And with Maya by his side, he knew he could face whatever came next. The door clicked shut behind him, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. The truth had been revealed. Now, it was time to make things right. Navigate a powerful emotional journey where a courageous young girl exposes betrayal, uncovers hidden truths, and saves a billionaire's life in a cinematic blend of suspense, compassion, and justice. This narrative dives deep into themes of integrity, redemption, and the strength found in unlikely heroes, making it a standout among Black stories that highlight resilience and moral clarity. As the plot unravels through intense confrontations, heartfelt revelations, and the fight to rebuild what was broken, the storyline embodies the essence of Black stories that inspire and uplift. With vivid cinematic tension and character-driven emotion, this tale captures the transformative power of truth in the face of deception, adding to the legacy of meaningful Black stories filled with bravery and humanity. Ultimately, the connection between the billionaire and the young girl becomes a symbol of hope, proving why Black stories continue to resonate deeply with audiences seeking purpose, justice, and compassion.